The white room was too bright, too sterile. Commander Zekathara found himself absently tracing the longest of his scars, the one that ran from his upper left thoracic plate down to where his third heart once beat. 20 years, and the phantom pain still lingered. Across from him, Nari Valari adjusted her recording equipment. The young Talshan journalist's skin flickered with nervousness, the bioluminescent patterns betraying her emotions despite her professional demeanor. "Are you certain you wish to proceed, Commander?" she asked, mandibles clicking softly. "Your military service record was sealed by the Hegemony Council itself." Zekathara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, an old military habit. "I have been ready for 20 years, he said, voice rough from disuse. "The nightmares come whether I speak or not. The truth deserves witnesses." Nari's recording device hummed to life, its gentle blue glow reflecting off the stark white walls. "Then, Commander, tell me about the Third Galactic War." The old soldier leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small table between them. "Not a war," he corrected. "Wars have rules. What happened with the humans was something else entirely." "Please elaborate." "It began with New Pittsburgh," Zekathara said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Our first mistake." The dropships descended through New Pittsburgh's atmosphere in perfect formation. Commander Zekathara, then captain of the 87th Expeditionary Force, stood at the viewport, watching the human colony grow larger. Mining facilities and habitation domes spread across the rocky terrain like a disease. "Tactical assessment?" he asked his second-in-command, Major Kelshan. "Minimal resistance expected." "Captain, preliminary scans show approximately 30,000 colonists, mostly miners and their families. Defense capabilities limited to a small security force." Zekathara nodded. The Hegemony's demands were reasonable. Access to 30% of their quadronium mines in exchange for protection and technology. Their rejection was illogical. "Humans often are," Kelshan replied, mandibles twitching in what passed for a smile among their kind. The invasion proceeded like clockwork. Within 6 hours, the main colonial administration building was under Hegemony control. Human security forces surrendered after minimal casualties, exactly as predicted. Zekathara personally accepted the colony administrator's surrender, a balding human male who seemed more irritated than frightened. "You've made a serious miscalculation," the administrator had said as he signed the capitulation documents. Zekathara had dismissed the comment as typical human bravado. 3 days later, the first supply convoy disappeared. No distress signal, no wreckage, Major Kelshan reported, his skin patterns displaying concern. 6 vehicles, 28 personnel, simply gone. Zekathara ordered drone surveillance increased. The second convoy was attacked the following day, but this time there was footage, blurry, fragmented, but enough to see the convoy hadn't been attacked by military forces. The assailants wore civilian clothing, mining gear, maintenance uniforms. "Impossible," Zekathara had muttered, reviewing the footage. "Their military surrendered. These are ghosts." Over the next week, 37 more Hegemony soldiers disappeared. Equipment malfunctioned at critical moments. Communication systems broadcast strange, disembodied human laughter. Food supplies were found contaminated with non-lethal but incapacitating chemicals. Then came the capture of Lisa Murphy, a maintenance worker in the primary colonial administrative building. She had been caught placing a small device in the environmental control system. Analysis showed it would have released a neurotoxin specific to Takshari physiology into the air circulation. "Why?" Zekathara had asked during her interrogation. "You are a civilian, a technician. Your military surrendered. This action violates all conventions of warfare." Lisa Murphy had smiled, an expression Zekathara would see in his nightmares for decades to come. "There's no such thing as a civilian on a frontier world. Commander, we're all soldiers. Some of us just don't wear uniforms." 2 days later, they caught Jake Williams, a farmer from the outskirts of the colony. He had been responsible for the disappearance of at least 12 hegemony soldiers, luring them into subterranean chambers beneath his hydroponics facility where they were exposed to a hallucinogenic gas and left to kill each other in confused terror. "I grow all sorts of things," Williams had said during his interrogation, with that same terrible smile. "Plants, vegetables, chemical weapons. You learn to be versatile out here." The pattern repeated. Dr. Susan Hayes, the colony's chief medical officer, had been systematically collecting biological samples from the occupying forces, developing pathogens that targeted specific Takshari vulnerabilities. "I took an oath to protect human life," she explained calmly when caught. "Not yours." Sleep became impossible for the occupying forces. Every face became suspect. Every civilian interaction potentially lethal. Zekathara ordered tighter restrictions, harsher punishments, more aggressive patrols. Nothing worked. "They're not acting like conquered people," Kelshan observed one night, his skin patterns showing deep distress. "It's as if they expected us." Zekathara reviewed the tactical data again and again. The humans were losing, by any conventional metric. For every hegemony soldier killed, 5 humans died in retribution. Resources were dwindling. Infrastructure was being systematically destroyed by hegemony forces in response to sabotage. Yet the resistance continued, unabated and increasingly creative. "We're fighting ghosts, sir," one of his lieutenants reported after another failed sweep. "They appear, strike, and vanish. Sometimes they're miners, sometimes they're children. Yesterday, I swear I saw an old woman transform into a maintenance tunnel before my eyes." Zekathara knew it was fear-talking, but he couldn't dismiss the sentiment. Something fundamental about warfare had changed, and the hegemony doctrine had no answer for it. After 3 months, High Command ordered withdrawal from New Pittsburgh. The official record called it a strategic redeployment. Every soldier who served there knew the truth. They had been defeated, not by an army, but by farmers, doctors, and maintenance workers who had somehow turned an entire world into a weapon. The New Pittsburgh campaign was merely the beginning, Zekathara continued, his voice growing hollow as he spoke to the journalist. A minor defeat that should have warned us. But the hegemony had conquered 17 species, across 3 galactic arms. Human resistance was viewed as an anomaly, not a pattern. Nari Valari's skin patterns showed intense interest. "So the hegemony forces continued to other human worlds?" "Yes. New Atlantis was next. An ocean world, covered almost entirely by water, with floating cities and deep-sea mining operations. Strategic value, high. Projected resistance, minimal." Zekathara's upper eyes closed, as if shielding him from the memory. "We were wrong again." The hegemony naval deployment to New Atlantis was overwhelming by design. 50 capital ships, 200 support vessels, and a clear message: resistance would be futile. Unlike New Pittsburgh, this would not be an occupation, but a demonstration of absolute power. The floating cities of New Atlantis surrendered immediately. No conditions, no negotiations. The civilian leadership welcomed hegemony forces with apparent cooperation. Fleet Admiral Vexathorn, Zekathara's superior, was pleased. "The humans learned quickly," he observed from the bridge of the flagship, "inevitable dominance. New Pittsburgh taught them the cost of defiance." Zekathara, now promoted to commander, after the successful redeployment from New Pittsburgh, was less convinced. "Sir, I recommend caution. The New Pittsburgh resistance was unconventional." "Noted, Commander. But New Atlantis is different. No place to hide on an ocean world." For 2 weeks, the occupation proceeded smoothly. Hegemony ships patrolled the vast oceans. Floating cities were placed under efficient administrative control. Mining operations resumed with hegemony oversight. Then, the relentless Hunter, a mid-sized destroyer, disappeared without warning or distress call while patrolling the deep Western Ocean. Sensors showed nothing. No explosion, no attack. Simply a ship there one moment and gone the next. 3 days later, the victorious conqueror suffered the same fate in a different sector. Then 2 more vessels within 24 hours. Zekathara found himself summoned to the Admiral's war room, where holographic projections showed the patterns of disappearances. Analysis suggests human submarines, the intelligence officer reported. But our sensors should detect any vessel large enough to threaten our ships. Depth? Zekathara asked. Sir? At what depth did these disappearances occur? The intelligence officer checked his data. All beyond 20,000 meters. Zekathara felt a chill. The deepest hegemony vessels operate at 15,000 meters. We assume that was a universal technological limitation. Admiral Vexathorn's skin flashed with anger. You suggest humans have deep-sea capabilities beyond our own? Impossible. They are a young species, barely spacefaring. With respect, sir, I've learned that impossible is a dangerous word when applied to humans. The Admiral dismissed his concerns, ordering increased patrols and escort formations. The losses continued. Ships would disappear, or suddenly find their hulls breached by weapons that left no energy signature, no radiation trace, nothing that hegemony sensors could detect until it was too late. 17 days into the adjusted patrol strategy, they captured their first human submarine. It was a strange vessel, compact, built for extreme pressure, with a crew of only 12. The captain was a human military officer named Colonel Dan Foster. Zekathara personally conducted the interrogation. Your submarine capability exceeds our intelligence assessments, he began, studying the calm human before him. How long have you operated vessels at such depths? Colonel Foster shrugged. 30 years, give or take. We've always been good at ocean warfare. Earth is mostly water, you know. Your actions are futile. For every hegemony vessel you destroy, we can deploy 10 more. Probably, Foster agreed. But can you afford to? Explain. Cost-benefit analysis. Commander, each of your capital ships requires, 5 years to construct? Thousands of personnel? Massive resource investment? Our submarines can be built in months by small teams. We're making them faster than you can replace your losses. Zekathara leaned forward. You are still losing this war. Your cities are occupied. Your resources confiscated. Foster smiled that terrible human smile. Acceptable losses. You sacrifice your own people willingly. We sacrifice what we must to ensure humanity survives. New Atlantis was never about winning a conventional war. It's about making occupation so costly that you'll never consider it worthwhile. The human's calm certainty disturbed Zekathara more than any show of defiance would have. Your submarine fleet will be hunted down and destroyed now that we understand your capabilities. Foster's expression didn't change. You've captured one submarine design. We have others. Some so deep your sensors will never find them. Some disguised as marine life. Some so small they carry only a single torpedo and a pilot who won't be returning home. Zekathara's skin patterns betrayed his shock before he could suppress them. Yes, Foster said, noticing the reaction. Suicide operators. Volunteers. All of them. Do you have any concept of how terrifying it is to dive 20,000 meters in a vessel barely larger than a coffin, knowing you'll never surface again? That's what we're willing to do. This violates all principles of civilized warfare, Zekathara said quietly. Civilized warfare, Foster repeated, almost laughing. An interesting concept from a species currently occupying our sovereign worlds. 2 days after the interrogation, Admiral Vexathorn ordered a withdrawal from New Atlantis. The official reason: strategic redeployment of assets to more critical theaters. The unofficial reason was clear to everyone in the command structure. The hegemony could not sustain the rate of ship losses, not against an enemy willing to send its personnel on one-way missions into the crushing depths. New Pittsburgh and New Atlantis should have been enough, Zekathara told Nari Valari, his voice growing hoarse. 2 defeats, unconventional, but clear. Yet the Hegemony Council demanded decisive action. Humanity had humiliated the greatest empire in the galaxy. A response was required. Kepler Station, Nari whispered, skin patterns showing she knew what came next. Yes, Zekathara confirmed. Kepler Station, the greatest single loss of life in hegemony history. Kepler Station orbited the habitable moon of a gas giant, serving as humanity's primary military headquarters in that sector. Intelligence suggested it housed the command structure, coordinating resistance across multiple worlds. The assault force was overwhelming. 12 hegemony dreadnoughts, 30 cruisers, and over 300 fighter craft. Opposing them was a human fleet of 7 capital ships and perhaps 50 smaller vessels. Victory is assured, Grand Admiral Zorathi announced to the assembled command staff. The human fleet will be annihilated, and Kepler Station will become the hegemony's forward base for pacification operations. Zekathara, now serving as tactical advisor after his experience with human warfare, offered a warning. The disparity in forces may be deliberate. Admiral, humans have consistently demonstrated unconventional approaches. The Admiral dismissed his concern with a gesture. Conventional or not, no tactic can overcome such numerical disadvantage in space combat. The battle began precisely as planned. Hegemony forces surrounded the station, methodically dismantling the human defensive fleet. 6 of the 7 human capital ships were destroyed in the first hour of engagement. Fighter squadrons reported minimal resistance near the station itself. Victory seemed not merely assured but imminent. Then, Admiral Kate Morrison, commanding the last human capital ship, a heavily damaged vessel called Defiance, did the unthinkable. Rather than continuing the increasingly one-sided battle, she ordered her ship to accelerate directly toward Kepler Station. Zekathara was the first to recognize the implications. "They're ramming the station," he announced to the stunned command deck. "Order our forces to withdraw from the station's vicinity immediately." "Nonsense," Admiral Zorathi replied. "Their vessel is crippled. This is a desperation move." "Sir, I believe—" His warning came too late. The Defiance struck Kepler Station at a precise location, directly into what later analysis would confirm was the station's main reactor core. The resulting explosion was unlike anything in recorded hegemony warfare. The station, the Defiance, and 9 hegemony vessels in close proximity simply ceased to exist. 17 more hegemony ships were crippled beyond repair by the shockwave. 200,000 hegemony personnel lost in an instant. Later, intelligence would confirm that Kepler Station had been evacuated of all non-essential personnel days before the battle. Admiral Morrison and her crew, approximately 5,000 humans, had sacrificed themselves to eliminate 40 times that number of hegemony forces. In the stunned silence of the command deck, Zekathara had turned to Admiral Zorathi. "Acceptable losses," he said quietly. "That's what they call it." After Kepler Station, the war's course was irrevocably altered. Zekathara explained to Nari, whose recording device hummed steadily between them. The Hegemony Council demanded a decisive victory, one that would break the human will to resist. They chose Kepler 442b, humanity's most established colony world beyond their home system. "The Kepler massacre," Nari whispered, her skin patterns displaying revulsion. "History has many names for it," Zekathara replied. "For those of us who were there, no words have ever been adequate." The hegemony assembled its largest military force in 5 centuries for the assault on Kepler 442b. 300 capital ships, 1,000,000 ground troops. A clear directive: break the human resistance permanently. The initial orbital bombardment lasted 3 days. Precision strikes targeted military installations, government buildings, infrastructure, and transportation networks. From orbit, it appeared comprehensive and devastating. Zekathara, now promoted to division commander, led one of the first ground assault teams. Their dropships landed in what had been the planetary capital city, now reduced to rubble and ash. Sensor sweeps show minimal life signs, his tactical officer reported. Surviving population appears to have retreated underground. Underground! Zekathara's skin flickered with concern. What underground structures exist? Unknown, Commander. Preliminary scans show extensive tunnel networks beneath major population centers, but our sensors are being disrupted by some form of interference. Zekathara ordered caution, but High Command demanded immediate pursuit. The humans could not be allowed to regroup. 20 assault divisions were deployed to secure the underground complexes. The 1st Division entered the tunnels beneath the capital city. 6 hours later, all contact was lost. The 2nd Division, sent to investigate, suffered the same fate. When the 3rd Division reported encountering living walls and geometries that change when not observed. High Command finally heeded Zekathara's call for a tactical reassessment. Drone reconnaissance revealed fragments of the horror. The tunnel systems were not merely bunkers or shelters. They were engineered killing grounds. Corridors that appeared straight would somehow loop back on themselves. Chambers would expand or contract. Environmental conditions would shift rapidly. One section might be superheated, the next flash frozen. More disturbing were the biological components. Surfaces coated with hallucinogenic compounds. Audio systems that produced sounds at frequencies that induced panic in Takshari nervous systems. Visual patterns on walls that created disorientation. It's not a shelter system, Zekathara reported to High Command. It's a weapon, one designed specifically to counter our physiology and psychology. The most senior admiral, a veteran of 12 campaigns, had stared at the footage in disbelief. How long would it take to construct such a system? Years, at minimum, Zekathara replied. Possibly decades. Before we even encountered humanity? Yes. That would mean... They prepared for an invasion they had no reason to expect. Zekathara finished the thought. Or perhaps they prepared for any invasion, from any species, with any physiology. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Humanity had developed defenses against threats they had never encountered. For wars they could not have anticipated. High Command ordered a change in strategy. Rather than pursuing the humans underground, they would deny them the surface entirely. Orbital bombardment was resumed, this time targeting the planet's ecology. Forests were burned, water sources contaminated. The atmosphere itself seeded with compounds toxic to human biology. For 7 days, Kepler 442b burned. When finally the bombardment ceased, sensors indicated the planet's surface was incompatible with unprotected human life. Victory is achieved, High Command announced. The underground population will be contained until surrender or extinction. 3 days later, the first hegemony world was attacked. They called them ghost raids, Zekathara told Nari, his 4 eyes now fixed on some distant point beyond the white walls of the interview room. Small teams of humans, somehow transported across vast interstellar distances, striking targets deep within hegemony space. How many worlds were attacked? Nari asked, her journalist's detachment slipping as her skin patterns showed increasing distress. 17, Zekathara replied, all simultaneously. The pattern was identical across all targets. Small teams of humans, 5 to 12 individuals, appearing without warning at critical infrastructure sites, university research centers, military command nodes, production facilities, communications hubs. Their attacks were not designed to cause maximum casualties. Instead, they targeted specific systems, individuals, or data. A leading hegemony weapons scientist would be assassinated, but his family left unharmed. A military communications array would be destroyed, while the barracks next to it remained untouched. On Velkar Prime, the most prestigious university in the hegemony, 6 humans infiltrated the central data repository and transmitted the contents to an unknown destination before destroying the originals. Centuries of scientific advancement, gone. The psychological impact far outweighed the material damage. If humans could strike the heart of the hegemony with impunity, nowhere was safe. Markets collapsed. Civil unrest spread across a dozen worlds. Military recruitment plummeted. Most disturbing was the question no one could answer. How had they done it? Human faster-than-light technology was thought to be primitive compared to hegemony capabilities. The distance between Kepler, 442b, and the nearest hegemony world was over 6,000 light-years. Yet somehow, they had crossed that vast gulf to strike with surgical precision. The Hegemony Council convened an emergency session. For the first time in its 12,000-year history, the word surrender was spoken in those hallowed chambers. 3 days later, a human diplomatic vessel appeared in orbit around the hegemony capital world. Its sole passenger was a human negotiator named Helen Ross. Zekathara, as one of the few high-ranking officers with direct combat experience against humans, was summoned to the negotiation team. He expected to find a hardened military leader or calculating politician. Instead, Helen Ross was a small, elderly woman with silver hair and a soft voice. The hegemony has expressed interest in peace terms, she began without preamble. Humanity is prepared to offer them. The hegemony's chief negotiator, a being of immense dignity and authority, responded with carefully measured words. The recent unpleasantness between our civilizations has been unfortunate. The hegemony is prepared to discuss reasonable accommodations to resolve our differences. Helen Ross smiled. That same, terrible smile Zekathara had seen on the faces of prisoners on New Pittsburgh. Let me be clear. These are not negotiations. These are terms of surrender. Yours, not ours. Shocked silence filled the chamber. Humanity demands the immediate withdrawal of all hegemony forces from human-controlled space. All human prisoners will be returned unharmed. Reparations will be paid for damages to human worlds. Trade will resume on equal terms. And a permanent cultural exchange program will be established to ensure the hegemony better understands its neighbors. This is unprecedented, the chief negotiator sputtered. The hegemony does not surrender. We have existed for 12 millennia. Our territory spans 3 galactic arms. And yet, here we are, Ross replied calmly. Your choice is simple. Accept these terms, or we will bring the war to every hegemony world simultaneously, not with small raiding parties, but with our full military capability. Impossible, another negotiator interjected. Your species lacks the resources, the technology, the force projection. 3 days ago, we demonstrated our ability to strike 17 of your worlds simultaneously. Ross interrupted. That was with fewer than 200 personnel total. Would you like to see what we can do with 20,000? 200,000? Zekathara studied the human carefully. You've lost millions of your own people, he said quietly. Your worlds lie in ruins. How can you speak of escalation? Ross turned to him, her eyes showing recognition. Commander Zekathara, your reputation precedes you. One of the few hegemony officers who actually began to understand us. She leaned forward. To answer your question, acceptable losses. Kepler 442b was never our primary colony. New Atlantis was never our primary naval base. We sacrificed what we could afford to sacrifice to learn your capabilities, your tactics, your weaknesses. The implications stunned the assembled negotiators. The devastating human losses, the planets rendered uninhabitable, the fleets destroyed, the millions dead, had been calculated sacrifices in a larger strategy. The terms are generous, Ross continued. Far more generous than they would have been had you succeeded in breaking our resistance. I suggest you accept them, while the offer stands. The Hegemony Council, for the first time in its 12,000-year existence, surrendered. The peace that followed was uneasy, Zekathara told Nari, his voice now barely audible. Technically, all terms were fulfilled. Hegemony forces withdrew. Prisoners were exchanged. Trade resumed. The cultural exchange program was established. But, Nari prompted, many of us who fought against humans recognized the final condition for what it was. Not cultural understanding, but ongoing surveillance. Human exchange scholars appeared on every major hegemony world. Human trade representatives established presence in every significant hegemony industry. Human tourists somehow always managed to visit sensitive military or research installations. Zekathara's scarred hands trembled slightly. The peace itself was a continuation of psychological warfare. The hegemony had not merely been defeated militarily, it had been traumatized into submission. Is that why you're speaking now, after 20 years? Nari asked. Partly, Zekathara admitted, but also because of what happened to those of us who fought humans directly. A condition developed among veterans. The Hegemony Medical Authority classified it as post-combat neurological disturbance. The human cultural attaches who reviewed the cases called it something else, Terran Combat Syndrome. Symptoms: paranoia, insomnia, the conviction that humans are always watching, always one step ahead, that everything, from casual encounters to major political developments, is part of some elaborate human strategy decades in the making. Zekathara's skin patterns showed deep distress. The worst part is, for many of us, it's not clear whether these are symptoms of a psychological disorder or accurate perceptions of reality. Nari's recording device hummed in the silence that followed. No species has challenged humanity since the war. Zekathara continued eventually. Not the hegemony, not the collective, not even the swarm. All have observed the treaty boundaries with meticulous care. Official explanation, diplomatic success, unofficial reality, terror. Of what exactly? Nari asked. Of an enemy that designs underground labyrinths before they've ever been invaded. That sends its soldiers on one-way missions into crushing ocean depths. That sacrifices entire worlds as pawns in a larger game. Zekathara's four eyes focused intently on the journalist. An enemy whose capacity for long-term planning and calculated sacrifice exceeds anything in our experience. Nari's skin patterns shifted to show thoughtful consideration. Some would say you attribute too much to human capabilities. That you see grand strategy where there was only desperate adaptation. Perhaps, Zekathara conceded. That is the nature of Terran Combat Syndrome, the inability to distinguish between paranoia and insight. He leaned forward. But consider this. In the 20 years since the war, humanity has expanded to 37 new worlds. Their technological development has accelerated. Their military capabilities, from what little our intelligence can determine, have grown exponentially. Yet they maintain the peace with absolute fidelity. Suggesting what? That peace serves their purposes, for now. The recording device clicked off. Nari gathered her equipment, her professional demeanor returning. Thank you, Commander. The Galactic News Network appreciates your candor. This will be a significant historical document. Zekathara remained seated as she prepared to leave. There is one question you haven't asked, he said. Nari paused. What question is that? Why humans are the way they are? Why they fight as they do? And do you have an answer? Zekathara's scarred hand again traced the line where his third heart had once been. During my recovery after New Pittsburgh, I studied human history, their planet, Earth, shaped them in ways we cannot fully comprehend. They evolved as both predator and prey, constantly adapting to threats. Their recorded history is an unbroken sequence of conflicts, tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. His voice dropped lower. While the hegemony was building an interstellar empire based on order and hierarchy, humans were still fighting among themselves, developing ever more creative ways to defeat enemies who shared their own biology, psychology, and planet. When they finally reached the stars, they had been preparing for war against the unknown for thousands of years. Nari's skin patterns showed disturbed understanding. You're saying their history made them weapons? Not weapons, Zekathara corrected. Survivors. At any cost. He looked up at the young journalist. That is what the hegemony failed to understand. What I failed to understand until too late. We were not fighting a conventional enemy with conventional goals. We were fighting a species conditioned by its entire evolutionary and cultural history to ensure its survival through any means necessary. Nari stood in silence for a moment, then asked, "Do you fear them still, Commander?" "Fear is the wrong word," Zekathara replied. "I respect them. I understand them, in ways few non-humans can. And I watch them, as they watch us, wondering not if, but when the fragile peace will no longer serve their purposes." After Nari left, Zekathara remained in the White Room alone, surrounded by the sterile walls and the weight of memory. 20 years of silence broken at last. 20 years of nightmares shared. Outside, beyond the medical facility, beyond the hegemony border worlds, human ships patrolled their expanding territory. Human diplomats maintained cordial relations. Human exchange scholars studied alien cultures with polite interest. And deep beneath the restored surface of Kepler 442b, in tunnels that had never been fully mapped, the next generation of defenses took shape, for wars not yet fought against enemies not yet encountered. Acceptable losses, always acceptable losses.